Hello. Next up is Rein Zobel, creative director and co-founder of Mao VR, and he's going to talk about designing structure in permadeath games. So I hope you guys are excited, and let's welcome him.
Hi. Thank you. So yes, hope you can hear me. My name is Rein. I come from the lesser-known Nordic country of Estonia, and I'm here today to tell you about designing structure into permadeath games. So what does that mean? Permadeath games are amazing. I like playing them. I like designing them. And not that long ago, there was this understanding that it's a bad thing when a player dies in the game, because dying is not fun, and players want to have fun when they're playing a game. But this resurgence of all kinds of high-stakes games or run-based games, like roguelikes or souls-likes or battle royales, extraction shooters, vampire survivors likes, all of these games and all these new genres that are popping up are demonstrating that players actually like when a game has a very clear lose condition. When you lose a lot of stuff or progress or whatever kind of resources when you die in a game, it makes the game more interesting. It gives you more adrenaline when you're playing. You're afraid that you will do something wrong. You get more focused. You start planning ahead. All these new interesting things start happening. And as we have seen in a couple of recent years, due to success to a lot of these types of games, that AAA is catching on, that these types of games will probably be the new norm in not so distant future. But as I was making my own high-stakes game and designing it, then I realized that actually these genres don't really have these blueprints. And some of these rules are not written yet. So the point of this talk is to tell you a little bit about my experience when I was trying to make a high stake or a permadeath or whatever we call it, these types of games, and how to give it some structure. Now, what do I mean by structure? Because I was still am, the creative director of a small studio. We are about 15 people in Mao VR working on this game. Then I had the role to be the creative director, but also the narrative director and the gameplay designer and the lead writer. So all of these different disciplines for me is like one big thing. It's a structure of the game that holds the game together and how the player feels the game when they're playing it. So yeah, I think as an indie developer, you don't necessarily have the freedom to differentiate between those disciplines. So for me, it's just structure, the thing that holds the game together. And just in this presentation, I try to give a little bit more zoomed out view about the different types of games. And one note about multiplayer is that I'm not going to talk about multiplayer specifically in this talk, because story and structure in multiplayer games are a very different beast, and this deserves its own talk. Our game is single player, but just so you know, there's no real reason why any of this that I'm talking about doesn't apply to multiplayer games. So, let me start off by showing you our game. It's called Bootstrap Island. And I will show you the trailer of the game. I have YouTube ads on my screen. Wait. Okay. So, Bootstrap Island is a roguelike survival virtual reality game where you take the role of a 17th century survivor stranded on a tropical island. It's a kind of like Robinson Crusoe in VR. The player needs to find food, find water, make a fire before the night starts, otherwise they will be dead. They have to use gunpowder weapons to hunt and keep away various monsters of the island. And as you survive for longer and longer, you start to unravel the mysteries of the island, also get to know about your past a little bit more. So we released in early access on Steam in 2024, and now just 2 months ago we went into 1.0, the full release, and the PlayStation VR 2 version is coming out later this year, hopefully very soon. We received the Game of the Year award in 2024 in Estonia, and that was before we even added story to the game. So we originally launched just the systemic version of Bootstrap Island, and then with major patches, we added new systems and new story elements to the game. So now with 1.0, we had like a full story with end credits and everything. And I should also mention that a lot of VR games are sort of like ports of regular games that already exist. But with Bootstrap Island, from the beginning, it was our goal to create this unique blend of roguelike and survival, and kind of trying to make it work in this virtual reality immersive setting where you are much more involved and much more aware of everything that happens around you. So these are the struggles that we had. To kind of start from somewhere, let's look at different types of progression in a game. Let's start with a linear game. So your regular single-player story mode game, you have 4 levels or 4 biomes or worlds, like let's say your forest level, your ice level, your mountain level, your lava level, and each of these levels is also a story chapter. So as a player, you progress through the campaign, through the story. You have shootouts or enemies or puzzles or whatever, and you progress within these rules. And the challenges get stronger, but also your character gets stronger. You get more weapons, more upgrades, more skills, the numbers go up. So you progress within it. And there's probably some boss monsters, usually when you change chapter, like at the end of first chapter, there's this boss. When you defeat the boss, then you get to go to the next chapter. And along this journey, the player will die. Depending on the game, he might die not at all or a lot of times. But that's not a problem because you have save points. So those could be auto saves or manual saves. There's usually a save before the end boss, and then when you kill the boss at the beginning of the next chapter, you have a save point. So yeah, this is all very normal and regular. So this is how you advance. When you die, you load the game and continue. And of course, like Resident Evil Requiem, God of War, these are good examples of this kind of linear structure working very well. I mean, there might be some backtracking. You might play like a hardcore mode or Iron Man mode for extra challenge or something like that. But basically, these are linear games. These are meant to be played that way. So, as another example, let's take a roguelike game. And one clarification, I don't find the distinction between roguelike and roguelite games very useful. There's sometimes people use the term roguelite for roguelike games which have a meta progression, but I think almost all roguelike games have a meta progression, so I'm just going to call them roguelikes. But usually the structure is still similar. You still have different worlds with a story progression as you go deeper and deeper. You still have bosses at the same places. Players will still die. The main distinction, of course, is that you only have one save point, and that's the beginning of the game. because when you die, however far into the game, you will then have to start the whole game all over again. And you can assume that players will see the first level many, many times if it's a hard game. So roguelike games usually have some randomization. The levels are different, the monsters are different, the upgrades that you find are different. But at the same time, you're still progressing. You're grinding some resources, getting level ups, getting new abilities. So you start again, but at every time you are more skilled as a player, but also your character gets stronger and stronger. And yeah, there might be some hub level or a lobby in the beginning, but it's just a place to find upgrades and stuff like that. So the best classical examples would be Binding of Isaac and the first Hades. Binding of Isaac, of course, is one of the, I would say, one of the games which really repopularized or actually popularized the roguelike genre in modern times, where they have this system that when you have certain challenges or achievements, then these become these items that you find in the game in the future runs. And there's also some very interesting design choices. For example, you have to kill the end boss, the mother, 11 times, I think, in order to open up new levels. So repetition is how you advance also, which I find very, very interesting, that you get to the end boss and then do it again 11 times. And then on the 12th run, now you have more levels to explore. So that's very interesting. And Hades, of course, proved that games like this can actually have a story, and a good one, that you can actually have narrative design around these roguelike games, and the fact that the character dies repeatedly means that they can still have meaningful narrative depth and progression. So when we come to 2026, these types of games are still popular, but usually they have a little bit different structure. It often happens that the hub world is not just a lobby, that you can actually choose where to go next. This lowers the stakes somewhat, because when you finish a chapter, you can go back to hub world every time you die, and then you can choose, like, you don't have to do the chapter 1 again every time, which is fair. I understand why this is being done, but at the same time, I feel like this is a compromise, that now it's not such a high-stake game, because you don't lose all of your progress, but it's still a run-based structure. You still repetitively go again and again, and you still have stuff to lose, and the stakes are still high. It's just like a more modern take on it. And two modern examples from this year would be Mugenics and Saros. Both of these have this type of structure, but something that often also happens in these type of games is that the layout of the world and how you progress, it's room-based. So the progression might fork at some points. You can choose where you go next, but they usually still end up in the same place, and these rooms are sort of self-contained. And even Saros, or this screenshot is actually from Returnal, it looks much more realistic. It's like a AAA game, but it still adheres to the rules. It's still this one particular encapsulated area where you have to kill all the enemies, and then you can move on to the next one. But what happens when you take the structure and try to put it into an open world game? Well, I tried, and it got really confusing, because when you have an open world where the player can choose freely where to go to next, then how do you add story structure to that? You don't really want to keep the player tied to one single area before they advance in the story. So what I was trying to do with Bootstrap Island was I wanted to add narrative depth to the game, but I wanted to add it to this roguelike mode. I didn't want to add a different game mode, So basically, so that when the player dies, they didn't have the repetition in the narrative, they would only have repetition in the gameplay, because death is part of the gameplay, because it's a permadeath game. So yeah, I tried to investigate it, and I was reaching design-wise this weird dead end where I didn't know where to go next. So two of the games that I took as examples when I was starting let's say they were inspirations for Bootstrap Island, were Don't Starve and Long Dark. Both are systemic survival games with very high stakes. When you die, you start all over again. But when I started analyzing them from the story perspective, I realized that that actually doesn't work, because Don't Starve doesn't have a story, and the Long Dark has a separate story mode, which only took 12 years to make, and it's episodic, and it's completely linear. So they added a different game mode, which is now linear. So I was at a dead end. I felt like there was this high-level meeting between some game designers where they decided that, hey, if the game is like an open-world high-stakes game, then there couldn't be any story in that. And I was not part of that meeting, so I didn't get the memo. But I didn't really accept that, because I think that a good game, like Sid Meier said, is a series of interesting decisions. Just the fact that the game has a story, that it has narrative depth, doesn't mean that it should be a dumbed down or a more linear version of that game. Because in a systemic game, you want to give players agency, and I want to give them replayability and high stakes, but the game could still be narrative. And as I was working with this idea that I could still have all of those things, I came to this revelation that different ways to progress can be separated from each other. So we have the game where we have all of those levels, and the save point is the beginning, but does that mean that the story progress should also follow the same rules? Because the story could be independent from where the player is geographically. And then when you die, what if you go to the beginning of the world, but you still have some of the progression of the story? And this changes everything. Now I had a way to approach it. And so when you take these progression methods, which are usually glued together, and start separating them, then you realize that, okay, the player can explore the world, they can get level ups or upgrades, maybe they even get new abilities like in Metroidvanias, where you go back and now you can open up a door that you couldn't before. So when you take these things apart and you combine them with a systemic game and the randomness that is inherent in a high-stake game, then you get a game where each player experience is different, but it still kind of holds up together. And this kind of led me to the second revelation, that a progress, and especially story progress, doesn't have to be a place, it could be a state in the game. So in Bootstrap Island, we added a weather system in one upgrade, as you do with a survival game. But at the same time, the second chapter of the story is a big storm. So at one point in the game, after a couple of days, when you're in chapter 2, it starts raining, the rain gets heavier and heavier, and it becomes this massive 3-day storm where the player has to take shelter in some cave. We don't care which one. There are different caves in the game. Actually, it's randomized, so in every run, some caves are blocked, some are open. So we have this set of conditions that the player has to survive in order to advance in the story, but we don't really care where it happens. And this means that we can also do interesting things with story progression, so that when the player is holding up in some caves, but they don't make it back by night, the fire gets put out by the rain, and then they die, and they start again. They're still in chapter 2, but they now have to complete the storm in one life. So, and in chapter 3, the player gets sick, he sees hallucinations, he needs to find a cure for his sickness, and when he eats some bad food, then the sickness gets worse and the hallucinations get worse. And also, we don't care where the player is. The story that he goes through, the story beats that we have, like flashback cutscenes or voiceovers, can happen everywhere. And this is a really good fit for a high-stake game, because the player can die, they can lose the stuff that they have, they go back into the beach where they woke up after the shipwreck, but they preserve the story progression. So this gives like a new layer, a systemic story layer to a game, and makes it more interesting. And of course, when we are introducing these new mechanics, the story can be like an extreme version of that. Like, yeah, now there's weather in the game, it can be raining, but only in the story you can have this extremely heavy storm. This also added to the fact that bosses don't really have to be tied to a story. Bosses can be a part of a place. Like this big ape, his name is Seymour, and he has his own jungle that the player has to go through in order to advance to the next area. But we don't really care when it happens. A very skilled player can go and defeat the boss on the first day, but a very safe player can wait after the storm and then go and try and defeat the big boss monster. So suddenly the boss becomes this geographic obstacle and not necessarily a part of the story. Something that can also be done, something that Don't Starve did, was roaming bosses, but I'm not sure if it's a good fit for every game. So basically, in Don't Starve, when the certain conditions are met, then a boss comes and follows you everywhere in the game. But that, of course, means that your level design has to accommodate that, because bosses usually are very big, so they might get stuck or whatever. So for us, it was easier to contain the bosses in one certain arenas. But there's definitely freedom to play around with that. Something that you have to do when you take this kind of approach to the story is that you have to remind the player about the story. Because when a game is long, and high-stake games or roguelike games or run-based games usually are, that players play them for hundreds of hours, and when the only info of where to go next was one voiceover line that I heard 2 months ago, then I have no idea where I can go next. This is a webcomic about the game Dead Rising, where you have to find cure for your little daughter, otherwise she will become a zombie. But this open world has so many different systems and things that are enticing you that there's this tonal mismatch, that you forget what you were actually doing every time you go out. So just a couple of voiceover lines or other kind of reminders, like we used some pillars of smoke coming from certain places, or other conditions, or like hallucinations, that every now and again point the player where they need to go, are super helpful. It's usually not a good idea, or not very interesting, in my opinion, to tell players exactly what to do. It's better to give them a goal, and then they start working towards that. And the way I like to approach these reminding voiceover lines is usually I start with them being more vague, like, oh, maybe it's a good idea to have a better understanding of the island. And then the reminder number 5 is go on top of that island, on top of that mountain, and then look around. So you get more and more specific, because now players need more pointers of where to go to next. Revelation number 5 is to actually keep it simple, because I don't know how it seemed to you, but it might seem like what I'm describing is something very, very difficult, like a spider web of different systems. But if your building blocks are very simple and you just combine them in an interesting way, this can add to an interesting story. Like, you have your level design and the logic of that, and then you have the chapter, the story design, and you don't want to paint yourself in the corner also difficulty-wise, like when you test it and you want to tune the difficulty and now something takes longer or something is more complex, then you don't want everything to fall apart when you tweak one thing. So when you have a good structure, good foundation of how the game is built up structure-wise, then you can start adding interesting things to it, like maybe you add some shortcuts that you can go from one place to another or teleport, or maybe there's this story event where your stuff gets taken away, or some completely in-game cutscene of something happening randomly inside a story which the player doesn't expect. So if your foundation is solid, then you can do stuff like that and make it feel for the player organic and not like too formulaic. But of course, be careful not to overwhelm the players. One good example about a simple system that I like also from the Don't Starve is that they have a system in the game where the trees regenerate. And on its own, it's the most boring system ever, because you have a small tree, then it turns into a bigger tree, and then at one point, the tree dies. So like, what's special about it? But if you have a game where you have all these systems interacting with each other, then suddenly it feels so different because the game is alive, and when you go back to a place, it's now changed. And you have to take into consideration like where you can get more wood, which is the resource that you need. So yeah, simple systems, but use them in interesting ways. So for Bootstrap Island, this approach, I would say, was quite successful. When we launched the version 1.0, I was very much afraid that all of the systems that we have going on behind the scenes would be too difficult to the players. But interestingly, players very soon demonstrated that they are able to complete the whole story, and they don't get confused about it, and they don't even mention it, that there's a story in the game and the way that it advances. And this, I think, is a very good thing, because players, of course, are complaining about some things, but they're not complaining about the story, and they're not complaining that they don't understand what they need to do in order to progress. And this is something that you really don't see in high-stakes games that much. The game currently has more than 1,000 reviews and sits at a very positive rating, so we did something right, definitely. And I think also early access was a success for us, because this allowed for us to experiment with things and kind of go live with them one by one, add like a new system and a chapter, and then we would get instant feedback, like, is this too difficult? Is this too simple? Does it take too long? Do you get reminded enough? And so we can start building on top of that. And also I feel like when we want to add more stuff with updates, like new areas, new story chapters, new systems, that this wouldn't be a problem. Like, we already have a good foundation, and then we can build upon it. So I would say that for Bootstrap Island, this approach worked very well. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts or the games that you're making, how good of a fit it might be. But yeah, it might be that because we are making a survival game, which by its nature has a lot of systems which are already interacting with each other, then just adding a story layer or a story system on top of that might be more natural. But I think this approach would definitely work with different games as well. So, in summary, high-stake games can have a story. It's not impossible. Whoever decided that they can't is wrong. Different ways to progress can be separated from each other. Bosses in the game can be one of those systems which can be separated from the others. Keep on reminding players about the state of the world, otherwise they don't know that you have a story, because they get no info about it in the game. And try and keep it simple. Thank you very much. That was my talk. And it would seem that I was much faster than I anticipated. So very much open to questions.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, I have a mic.
Hello, thank you for this. I was wondering, do you have a way of handling multiple players on the same account or save slots? So like, let's say I finish Bootstrap Island and I give it to my friend, like, do you want to try? I mean, the game probably makes the assumption that like, okay, this player has completed the story, so they will get a different kind of narrative experience because the story is complete. Do you have a way of handling that, or any suggestions or how something that could work?
Very good question. Thank you. That was actually something that I struggled with a lot and ended up with a quite simple save slot system. So we have 5 save slots in the game, and each save slot is tied to the progression. So you can have, when you die in the game, you start a new run, but the progression is still connected to the save slot. And also we added a custom mode to the game where you can change things like the length of days and like, you know, you can turn off the hostile animals and stuff like that. But the custom mode and the story mode are in separate save slots, so they can't mix. And also achievements can only be gained in the story mode. So when you want to show the game to your friend, you have the choice, like whether I use my old run and this progression, or I make a completely fresh save slot and then just start from there. We also were thinking about some kind of like a profiles in the game, but save slot make a lot of more sense. And when you play on PlayStation, for example, then the profile system is something which is from the system level anyways, so every user would have their own save slots. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah,
Hey.
you can hear me. I was thinking about how do you use environmental storytelling in a game like this? I'm guessing it's very useful for this kind of structure, permadeath-based structure. Because I was thinking about Outer Wilds as like an example of a similar game where you get reset back to the beginning, and it's mainly environmental storytelling, right? And how do you use these aspects in your game?
Environmental storytelling, yeah. Well, weather is definitely environmental storytelling. I mean, weather has different layers as well, because the sky changes, you have raindrops in the air, you have wind particles, stuff like that, hallucinations the same way. But also, one thing that we did, I didn't talk about it, is that we have one in-game cutscene, which basically you're meeting this, we have a system in the game with tribals. You have local tribes coming and you have to communicate with them using body language and special items. And we have one story moment where a boss comes and kills one tribal. And that was so hard to do. This is something that I don't suggest at all, because the player could be anywhere on an island. He could be in a cave, and then these NPCs have to find a way to him, and sometimes the boss would not get stuck, but he would be hidden in a bush somewhere, because the foliage is not part of how they see the environment. So the nav mesh is separate from that. So something very cool happened, and now there's a dead guy in the bushland. I have no idea what happened. So I don't really suggest that. That was a bit too ambitious, but it was fun to try out. But usually in-game cutscenes are something that I suggest keeping, blocking them to certain places. But environmental storytelling in terms of something that you can see from anywhere is definitely a very good way. Basically, you just have like a setting that says when these conditions are met, then this slider moves over here, and it works. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, so permadeath, of course, is a way to, it's the core mechanic for progressing the game mechanically, but you didn't touch at all about how permadeath is expressed narratively in your game. Is that something you put any weight on at all, or it's like completely optional for the genre, or what's your interpretation of it?
Yeah, definitely. Permadeath is something that should be narratively explained. Like every time where you respawn, maybe you're like a clone of 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 the same character, or like in Hades that you're immortal and you keep on respawning. In Bootstrap Island, the idea is that the volcano is you get to this info later, but basically the volcano is training you to be the champion of the island, and then you will be at one point protecting the island against the enemies. But basically, yeah, you should have a narrative reason for this to happen, and yeah, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. And then you have the interesting question, like when you respawn, do you have something that is constant the whole time, or you have some variation? To give you an example, like in Hades, when you respawn, like the character says something different each time, and then you have NPCs commenting on your death. Like, do you want to keep them the same way as they were in the last life, or is respawning the story beat that actually keeps pushing the story forward? So you have these interesting questions that you need to solve. But yeah, if it's not narratively explained in permadeath, then like why would you do that game or have it narrative death anyways? Although, yeah, just different ideas coming to my head, but oftentimes in extraction shooters like Arc Raiders or Deep Rock Galactic, is like you have like somebody dragging you back, or basically, oh, you didn't die, you're just came back to the base and now you're resting and now you can go again. So yeah, different options.
How about session length? I mean, like with VR, some people might be more susceptible to simulation sickness than others.
Mm-hmm.
How did you design for session length in a survival game that I'm guessing is fairly long if you play from beginning to end?
Yeah. Well, session length is kind of yeah. There's definitely different kind of elements which add to that, and you can balance around it, because originally this is something that actually we changed a lot during the early access phase, because the original concept was that the session length would be short, that the sessions would be intense, but apparently players don't like that in VR. They don't like to be killed off that often. So my worry oftentimes when balancing the game was maybe it's too easy. Like I want to kill off the player more often, because otherwise you would get too attached to this one life, and then the whole permadeath and roguelike structure kind of loses its purpose, because then when you get after like a certain threshold, then you don't want to die anymore. It's like now you're too invested, and it's just something to avoid. In most like Souls-like games or roguelike games, there's like a tutorial and then you get killed off. And this is for a very good reason, because you want players to be them to be on board with the idea that you die in this game a lot. And often you have like a tooltip that says death is part of the experience, and yeah, you died but you learned something new, kind of to explain to the player that it happens. But yeah, with VR it's definitely something that I originally wanted to do more, that you die more often, but unfortunately players got so attached that this seemed like too cruel. But it's a constant struggle and constant balancing, I would say. And we have players who have hundreds of hours in the game, which I maybe didn't expect in a VR game, where some people say like 1 hour is the maximum, but I think 3 or 4 hours is not that much. But that's me. So yeah, it's a balancing act, would be the short answer.
Anyone else with any questions? Then thank you.
Thank you. And I will be hanging around, and if anybody wants to discuss game design or permadeath stuff, then I'm happy to. Thanks.